What if the most jaw-dropping garden on your street isn't full of the plants everyone else is growing? What if it's built from perennials almost nobody has ever heard of, plants that quietly come back bigger every single year without you lifting a finger? July is actually the smart window to get them established. Number 1 on this list looks so exotic that most people assume you can only buy it from a florist, not grow it in your own backyard. And we're saving the strangest for last. Number 10 looks like pink smoke drifting off the ground, and almost nobody watching has ever seen it in person. Number 3 is a succulent that carries its own water supply, so drought simply isn't a threat. If you're tired of the same overplanted yard everyone else has, stick around, because this channel is all about growing rare, resilient beauty with almost zero effort. Let's get into it. These 10 are ranked from impressive to unforgettable, so stay for the back half. Plant 1, Alstroemeria. Number 1 is Alstroemeria, the Peruvian lily, the plant most people assume you can only buy from a florist. Depending on the cultivar, hardy varieties are generally rated for zones 5 through 9, though some of the more tender types are better suited to zones 7 through 10, so it's worth checking the specific variety for your region. It grows 1 to 3 feet tall and produces clusters of exotic, speckled flowers in shades of orange, pink, purple, and yellow, opening in repeat flushes from early summer clear through the first hard frost. It handles full sun to partial shade and rewards you with blooms that look nothing like a typical backyard perennial. Peruvian lily returns every year from fleshy underground rhizomes that store energy efficiently, dying back in colder weather and re-emerging reliably each spring without needing to be dug up. Planted in July, it establishes through the remaining warm season, often flowering the same year before settling into a fuller display the following summer. Established clumps slowly expand on their own, giving you more flowers every season without any additional purchases. Here's the detail almost no care guide mentions. You should never deadhead Alstroemeria with pruning shears. If you snip the top off a spent stem, the remaining stalk just yellows and sits there, wasting energy instead of producing new growth. Instead, grip the dead stem low, near the soil line, and pull it straight out with one firm, steady motion. Because the plant grows from a monocot stem structure, that pulling motion, not cutting, is what actually signals the rhizome to send up a fresh flowering stem. Commercial growers use this exact trick to keep plants blooming continuously. Water the bed the day before you plan to pull stems. Damp soil lets the stalk slip free cleanly instead of tearing into the rhizome. Taller varieties can get top-heavy with all those blooms, so a discreet stake or a bit of jute netting through the clump keeps them from flopping in wind or rain. The payoff is almost unreasonable given how little effort it demands. Cut blooms last 2 weeks or more in a vase, which is nearly unheard of among perennials, and a single clump can supply cut flowers all summer without ever looking picked over. Most people overlook Alstroemeria as a garden plant because they've only ever seen it in florist bouquets, never realizing that in the right climate it grows back on its own, year after year, with almost no maintenance at all. Plant it once, learn the pull-don't-cut trick, and you'll never buy another bouquet again. Plant 2, Baptisia. Number 2 is Baptisia, or false indigo, botanically Baptisia australis. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, hardy in zones 3 through 9, and produces tall spikes of blue-purple pea-like flowers in late spring. It handles full sun, poor soil, and long dry stretches without complaint, and it's rarely bothered by deer or rabbits. Baptisia survives because it develops one of the deepest taproots of any flowering perennial, reaching several feet underground to find moisture that would leave shallow-rooted plants struggling. That same taproot is why Baptisia resents being moved. Plant it where you want it to stay, because established clumps are notoriously difficult to transplant successfully. Plant it in July. Let that first season go almost entirely toward root development below ground, and by year 2 or 3 you'll have a mature, self-sufficient clump that essentially stops needing you. For companion planting, Baptisia pairs beautifully with early yellow or white bloomers like Coreopsis or Shasta daisy, since its blue-purple spikes and soft blue-green foliage act as a calming anchor next to brighter colors. If your plant starts to lean or flop, that's usually a sign of too much shade or overly rich soil. Baptisia actually performs best when it's left a little hungry. A peony ring or discrete stake set out in early spring can help it grow upright if space is tight. The payoff is structure and longevity few flowering perennials can match. Baptisia can live for decades in the same spot, growing into an almost shrub-like presence that anchors a bed all season, even after the flowers give way to dark, rattling seed pods that add fall and winter interest. Bumblebees are drawn specifically to the flower's shape, which is built for their weight and movement. Most people overlook Baptisia because it's slow in its first year or two, and impatient gardeners assume it's underperforming when it's really just building the root system that makes it nearly indestructible later. That patience is the entire secret. Give it 1 or 2 seasons, and it repays you for the next 30 years. Plant 3. Delosperma. Number 3 is Delosperma, or hardy ice plant, the succulent that carries its own water supply. Most garden varieties grow only 3 to 6 inches tall, spread into a dense mat, and produce vividly colored, almost fluorescent daisy-like flowers from early summer through fall. It's typically rated for zones 5 through 9 and treats drought as a non-issue rather than a challenge. Ice plant survives because its thick, fleshy leaves store water the way a cactus does, letting it shrug off weeks without rain that would kill most flowering ground covers. Planted in July in a hot, sunny, well-drained spot, it establishes fast and often flowers the same season it goes in. Once rooted, it spreads on its own, filling gaps between pavers or along dry slopes where grass won't grow. The one mistake that kills more ice plant than drought ever will is overwatering, especially in heavy or slow-draining soil. Those water-storing leaves make it vulnerable to crown and root rot the moment it sits in soggy ground. So if you're gardening in clay, work in some coarse sand or grit before planting rather than relying on extra watering to help it along. Pair it with other lean soil lovers like sedum or thyme, and resist the urge to mulch heavily around the crown, since ice plant wants dry air circulation at the base more than it wants moisture retention. The payoff is color intensity nobody expects from a plant this tough. The blooms look almost electric in bright sun, and because ice plant hugs the ground so tightly, it also suppresses weeds by blocking light from reaching the soil beneath it. Most people overlook it because they assume anything called a succulent must be delicate or strictly indoors, when certain hardy varieties are actually some of the toughest ground covers available for brutal, sun-scorched spots that defeat almost everything else you try there. Plant 4. Eryngium. Number 4 is Eryngium, or sea holly. Species like Eryngium planum grow 2 to 3 feet tall, producing spiky, metallic steel blue flower heads from midsummer into fall, hardy in zones 4 through 9. It actually prefers poor, dry, gravelly soil and performs worse the more you baby it with rich soil or extra water. Sea holly survives on a long taproot adapted to lean, well-drained ground, and like Baptisia, it dislikes being disturbed once settled. Planted in July, and it settles into neglect almost immediately, using the remaining warm season to anchor that root before winter arrives. The spiky, architectural foliage stays interesting even before the flowers appear, giving it presence in the garden long before bloom time. Because sea holly's whole appeal is contrast, plant it where its steely, metallic spikes can play against something soft and rounded nearby. Ornamental grasses, black-eyed Susans, or a mounding sedum all work well. Give it the worst spot in your yard, a gravel strip, a hot slope, a bed nobody else wants, and don't amend the soil with compost, which is the single most common mistake gardeners make with it. The payoff is a plant that becomes more striking the worse you treat it, a rare trait even among drought-tolerant perennials. Bees are drawn to the unusual flower structure, and the dried heads hold their metallic color well into fall when most other blooms have faded, making them a favorite for dried arrangements. Most people overlook sea holly because its spiky, almost aggressive look doesn't fit the soft, romantic image most gardeners associate with flowers. But that unusual structure is exactly what makes it stand out in a border full of predictable round blooms. Plant 5. Heuchera. Number 5 is Heuchera, or coral bells. It grows 8 to 18 inches tall, forming mounds of ruffled foliage ranging from lime green to deep burgundy to near black, with delicate flower spikes rising above in late spring. Hardy in zones 4 through 9, it actually prefers the dry, partially shaded conditions most flowering plants avoid. Coral bells return each year from a tough, woody root crown that survives winter cold and summer dryness alike, pushing out fresh foliage every spring with no special care. Planted in July in a shaded bed, it settles in fast, using its foliage to conserve moisture rather than depending on constant watering. One thing worth knowing before you plant: dark-leaved varieties especially can scorch if they get too much direct afternoon sun, so match the cultivar to your light. The deeper the foliage color, the more shade it typically wants. Coral bells work best as a foliage anchor at the front of a shaded border, planted alongside ferns, hostas, or astilbe, so its color and texture read as a deliberate contrast rather than competing for the same spotlight. Every few years, older clumps can start to heave out of the ground as the woody crown pushes upward. A light top dressing of soil in spring keeps the crown properly covered. The payoff is color where color almost never exists. Most shade gardens are a sea of plain green, but coral bells bring dramatic foliage tones that hold all season, not just during a brief bloom window. Hummingbirds visit the flower spikes, and the foliage provides textural contrast against everything planted around it. Most people overlook coral bells because they assume shade gardens are destined to be boring, and they never think to look for a foliage plant that carries color the way a flower usually does. Plant 6. Hesperalo parviflora. Number 6 is Hesperalo parviflora, or red yucca. This yucca relative, technically a member of the century plant family, grows 3 to 4 feet tall and spreads to 6 feet wide, with narrow, grass-like arching leaves and tall stalks that produce tubular red to coral flowers from late spring through fall. It's surprisingly cold-hardy for such a desert-looking plant, reliably grown as far north as Zone 5, and treats near-total neglect as an acceptable long-term care plan. It survives on a tough, fibrous root system built for arid conditions, going months without supplemental water once established, and actually resents overwatering more than underwatering. Planted in July in full sun, it settles into hot, dry soil almost immediately, and within a couple of seasons forms a substantial, architectural clump that needs essentially no pruning or fertilizing. Red yucca makes an excellent focal point rather than a background plant, since its evergreen, sculptural form holds interest even in winter. Backlight it if you can. Afternoon sun coming through those arching leaves and coral flower spikes is where this plant really performs. One caution worth passing along: the leaves and roots aren't safe to handle carelessly around curious pets, so plant it where it won't be a chew toy. The payoff is a striking, almost tropical presence that most people assume requires far more care than it does. Hummingbirds are drawn to the tubular flowers all season, and the evergreen foliage provides year-round structure even when nothing else is blooming. Most people overlook it because it looks exotic enough that they assume it belongs strictly in a desert climate, when in reality it handles a much wider range of conditions than its appearance suggests. That misconception keeps it out of yards and winters that would suit it perfectly well. Plant 7. Echinops. Number 7 is Echinops, or globe thistle. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall, producing perfectly round, spiky, steel blue flower globes from midsummer into early fall, hardy in zones 3 through 9. It handles poor, dry soil and full sun without complaint, treating rich garden beds as an unnecessary luxury. In fact, overly fertile, well-watered soil tends to cause floppy, weak stems rather than better blooms. Globe thistle survives on a deep, sturdy taproot that anchors it against drought and wind, allowing it to return every spring even in exposed, harsh locations. Planted in July, it uses the remaining warm season to establish that root system, coming back reliably the next year with minimal watering. Once mature, it rarely needs dividing and tolerates being left alone for years. One thing to know up front: globe thistle self-seeds readily, though it isn't typically classified as invasive. If you want to keep it contained, deadhead spent blooms before the flower heads turn brown and brittle and start shattering seed into nearby gravel or bare soil. That's exactly the kind of open ground where it germinates fastest. If a plant does show up where you didn't want it, pull it while it's young. Mature plants have that same tough taproot working against you, and a snapped-off stem will simply regrow from the root left behind. The payoff is a shape and color nothing else in a typical garden offers. Those perfect steel blue spheres create striking contrast against softer blooms nearby, and bees treat globe thistle like a magnet through peak summer. Most people overlook it because its geometric, sculptural look doesn't match the soft cottage garden aesthetic most people picture when they think of perennials. But that structural quality is exactly what makes it valuable as a contrast plant in an otherwise predictable border. Plant 8. Japanese Anemone. Number 8 is Japanese Anemone, botanically Anemone hupehensis. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall, producing delicate white or pink, saucer-shaped flowers on wiry stems from late summer well into fall, hardy in zones 4 through 8. It handles partial shade and average soil, blooming right when most other perennials have already finished for the year. Japanese anemone spreads through rhizomes underground, so a single planting grows into a fuller patch each season, and in loose, rich soil, that spread can be more enthusiastic than gardeners expect. If you want a controlled clump rather than a slowly expanding colony, plant it somewhere bordered by a path, a foundation, or another established root system that naturally limits how far it can wander, or be prepared to pull unwanted shoots each spring. Planted in July, and the roots established through the remaining warm months, rewarding you with blooms the following fall. Despite its delicate look, the wiry stems hold up well through wind and light rain, rarely needing staking. It pairs beautifully with hostas and ferns that hold the space earlier in the season, since Japanese anemone often doesn't hit its stride until they're already fading. The payoff is late-season color exactly when your garden needs it most. While most perennials fade by September, Japanese anemone is just getting started, extending the season and giving pollinators a critical food source before winter. Most people overlook it because its delicate appearance makes it seem like a pampered cutting garden flower rather than a low-maintenance perennial, which keeps it out of yards where it would actually thrive with almost no attention. Plant 9. Liatris. Number 9 is Liatris, or blazing star, botanically Liatris spicata. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall, producing tall, dense flower spikes in purple or white that open gradually from the top down starting in midsummer, hardy in zones 3 through 9. It handles full sun, average to poor soil, and drought once it's had a season to settle in. Liatris returns each year from a small underground corm that stores energy efficiently, surviving winter cold and re-emerging reliably every spring with no protection needed. Planted in July, it uses the remaining warm season to build that storage structure, setting up strong blooms the following summer, and established clumps slowly multiply on their own. The one condition Liatris genuinely can't tolerate is poorly drained soil in winter. A corm sitting in standing water is far more likely to rot than one dealing with summer drought, so good drainage matters more than watering schedule. Planted in loose groupings of 5 or more for the strongest visual impact, since its narrow, vertical form reads better in a cluster than as a single stem lost among rounder blooms. It also makes an excellent cut flower, lasting well in a vase if you cut it while the lower third of the spike is still opening. The payoff is timing that lines up almost perfectly with nature's calendar. Liatris blooms during the exact window when migrating monarch butterflies need fuel, making it one of the most valuable stopover plants you can grow for them. Most people overlook it because it's often mistaken for a common roadside wildflower, rather than recognized as a garden-worthy perennial with a genuinely unusual, long-lasting bloom habit. Plant 10. Prairie Smoke. Number 10 is Prairie Smoke, botanically Geum triflorum, the plant we teased at the very start, and almost nobody watching has seen in person. It grows just 6 to 18 inches tall, hardy in USDA zones 3 through 7, and in late spring it produces nodding pink to burgundy flowers that then transform into feathery seed heads resembling wisps of smoke hovering just above the ground. It thrives in poor, rocky, well-drained soil and asks for almost nothing once established. Prairie Smoke survives on a tough, fibrous root system built for native prairie conditions, meaning drought, wind, and neglect are things it's evolved to handle, not merely tolerate. Planted in July, the roots use the remaining warm months to anchor deep before winter, returning reliably the following spring with no mulching or protection required. It spreads slowly into a dense clump, filling space naturally rather than aggressively, so it never needs the kind of policing that faster spreaders do. One honest note: Prairie Smoke can be slow to establish and slow to bloom in its first year or two, especially from seed, so don't judge it too quickly if the first season looks quiet. Give it well-drained, sandy or gravelly soil rather than rich garden loam, and avoid sites that stay wet, since that's the one condition that will actually kill it. Pair it with other early, low-growing bloomers in a rock garden or gravel bed, where its low mound and feathery seed heads have room to be the star, rather than getting crowded out by taller neighbors. The payoff is pure novelty. Nothing else in a typical garden looks like this, especially when the seed heads catch afternoon light and seem to glow. It needs no deadheading, no fertilizing, and no division for years, while early bumblebees rely on its blooms before most other flowers have opened. Most people overlook Prairie Smoke simply because it's a native prairie species that never made it into mainstream nurseries. It's the kind of plant serious gardeners stumble onto by accident, then wonder why nobody mentioned it sooner. A jaw-dropping yard doesn't come from choosing the same 10 plants every gardening channel recommends. It comes from finding the perennials nobody else is growing, plants that quietly return year after year while doing something genuinely unexpected. July might seem like an odd time to plant, but for perennials like these, it's actually a head start. So tell me, which of these 10 are you planting first? Drop it in the comments, and if this video showed you something new, hit like and subscribe, because we're building a community of gardeners who figured out the most unforgettable yards aren't the ones everyone else has.